Hello and welcome to the Dharma podcast. In this episode, we will narrate the tragic story of how British imperialism ruthlessly destroyed an ancient center of Sanskrit learning in Bengal in the 19th century. The name of this institution, the Golishri Saṃskṛta-pāṭhaśālā of Calcutta. But before we begin, we request you to please subscribe to the Dharma podcast. Please like and share our videos, and don't forget to press the bell icon to get a notification each time we publish a new episode. So let's begin. Thomas Babbington Macaulay's comprehensive destruction of the unbroken educational heritage of India. This wouldn't have been so phenomenally successful but for the unstinted and unqualified official support that he got from William Bentinck, then the Governor General of India. By any yardstick, William Bentinck remains a gold standard robber baron who plundered and wrecked India on an epic scale. But in the context of this episode, Bentinck's cruel disruption of the centuries-old educational heritage and system of India is a devastation that we will perhaps never recover from. In fact, when Bentinck was just about 30 years old, the tree of evil had grown enormously inside him. But before this, let's look at a brief flashback. As a young governor of the Madras Presidency, William Bentinck had written a letter to a person named Lord Castlereagh in 1804, and I quote, "We have rode the country too hard, and the consequence is that it is in the most lamentable poverty." Close quote. But this letter was not remorse on the part of Bentinck, but it was a realization that the East India Company's bleeding of India at the point of the bayonet was not good for the fortunes of the East India Company in the long term. So instead of directly using the gun and the sword to plunder and destroy India, more effective, more efficient and more calculated measures were required. In summary, a big part of these measures also included a systematic breakdown of traditional Hindu institutions, and the one great weapon that would assist Bentinck in this destructive endeavor was education. And this is roughly the origin of what is known as the English education system or the Macaulayite education system, which we are faithfully following till date, even after 75 years of attaining political independence. The rotten core of this kernel almost remains unchanged, and only the external paint has been altered from time to time. Bentinck's vile project of destroying traditional Hindu institutions of learning was ably assisted by a club of four people, and I call it the racist quartet. These included, number one, Thomas Babbington Macaulay, Charles Trevelyan, Charles Metcalfe and Mountstuart Elphinstone. For now, it is unnecessary to dig out the details of what this club of four said and did as the willing handmaidens of William Bentinck, but their actions culminated in what was known as the English Education Act of 1835. After this, English became the official language of India, and it is a status that the English language still enjoys in India, minus the official patronage. And this phenomenon is also the clearest form of how colonization succeeds even when it no longer enjoys political clout. So, William Bentinck's disastrous, rather deadly project to deracinate and uproot the Hindu society began to produce fruits quite rapidly, but it also met with stiff opposition along the way. The first wave of opposition came quite naturally from Bengal, because Bengal, after all, was where the historic Battle of Plassey had taken place, and therefore it was also the original hub of British conquest and British power in India. By the later part of the 19th century, the Bengali Hindus began to publicly show their contempt for the British system of education, and these Bengali Hindus began to call the schools and colleges controlled by the Calcutta University, they called these schools and colleges as Gulam Khanas, or factories manufacturing slaves. But on the other side, the greatest victims of William Bentinck and his gang's heartless destruction were the traditional Sanskrit schools and colleges, or Pathashalas, and Bengal had a very, very long history. It was renowned from very ancient times as flourishing centers of Sanskrit learning and traditional Hindu learning. And all these places, all these Sanskrit Pathashalas in Bengal were easily comparable to the best Hindu institutions of scholarship at Kashi and other places. And in one deadly stroke, Bentinck and Macaulay had obliterated hundreds of these Sanskrit centers of learning in Bengal. And one such eminent institution was the Golisri Saṃskṛta-pāṭhaśālā, or the Golisri Sanskrit School in Calcutta. And until Bentinck arrived with his fatal axe, this school had been patronized, and it was recognized as an institute of excellence in Sanskrit education, even by European Indologists and Sanskritists of that period. One such eminent British Indologist and Sanskritist was a guy called H.G. Wilson. And this Wilson had encouraged the Golishri Pāṭhaśālā, and he was also instrumental in appointing many teachers and vidwans into the Sanskrit school. In our story, the head of the Golisri Pāṭhaśālā at that time was a great vidwan. His name is Premachandra-Vagisha. And the moment Premachandra-Vagisha heard that William Bentinck had decided to close down his beloved and his sacred Pāṭhaśālā, he felt as if lightning had struck him. Premachandra wrote several anxious letters to the same H.G. Wilson, who was now living in England. And his letters were actually verses and poems penned in exquisite Sanskrit language, and its contents are enough to melt even the hardest rock. I'll read out an English prose translation of a couple of these verses. Quote, "My dear Wilson, this is the Sanskrit college which you established, and it is akin to a lotus-filled pond. But now, all the scholar swans have gone away, having lost their patronage. Hunters lie patiently in wait on its shores. Their arrows are aimed at us. They are merely waiting for the right moment to shoot. If you protect us from them, your fame will become immortal." Close quote. So Wilson received Premachandra-Vagisha's letter, and his reply to his letter was also in the form of verses. He basically spoke in reassuring terms, and then he praised the glory and the eminence and the greatness and the immortality of Sanskrit, and he called Sanskrit as a language of the gods. But very cleverly, very interestingly, Wilson offered no concrete solution for saving the endangered Pathashala at Golishri. In itself, this also shows how, in a system of a naked imperialism, even renowned and respected scholars are pretty much helpless before a ruthless brute strength. But Premachandra-Vagisha was determined, and he did not give up till the end. So he wrote another series of letters to Wilson, and he pretty much repeated his earlier plea. And I quote, "Dear Wilson, this Sanskrit college is situated in the middle of sylvan greenery in the city of Calcutta by the side of the Golishri lake. It now resembles a timid and innocent deer. Fate has dealt it a cruel blow. Macaulay, the merciless hunter, is just about to shoot it with his sharp arrows. Oh Wilson, this frightened deer is making an earnest appeal to you with tears in its eyes, pleading for help in your name." Close quote. But even this time around, Wilson wrote another reply, and this reply was along the lines of the same of his previous response. But we are unaware whether Wilson indeed sincerely attempted to save the Goḽiśrī Saṃskṛta-pāṭhaśālā. But what we know for sure is that the Golisri Sanskrit School was pitilessly erased from history. And why? All because William Bentinck, Macaulay, and the whole racist establishment of the British East India Company, in all its arrogance, had declared and decided that a single shelf of good European literature was worth the whole of native literature of India, and that all the historical information which has been collected from all the books in the Sanskrit language is less valuable than what may be found in the most paltry abridgments used as preparatory schools in England. These are not my words. This is exactly what Macaulay wrote, and it is widely popular and widely available on the internet. But you know what is more amazing? What is more amazing is the fact that Macaulay pronounced this judgment on Sanskrit literature after clearly admitting that I have no knowledge of either Sanskrit or Arabic. But what clear knowledge he had was the full knowledge of the inner workings of the British imperial machinery, of which he was a substantial beneficiary. And the sad footnote to this very moving and very tragic story is that most people today in Calcutta will look at you strangely if you even mention the name of the Golisri Sanskrit School. 4 or 5 generations of people of Calcutta haven't even heard of the Golisri Saṃskṛta-pāṭhaśālā. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening.